Hello again, folks. Yes, I am going to be doing another video today on Zellner's latest motion into the Avery case. Crime in Italy, my phone's going off already. I haven't even been on camera for like 2 seconds. But before we get into that, I wanted to do a video on the David Thorne case. Now, to give you a brief background. On April 1st, 1999, in Alliance, Ohio, in the morning, a woman by the name of Yvonne Lane was found dead in her home by her mother. Now, Yvonne Lane and David Thorne knew each other. They had dated briefly, and then they didn't date, and then David didn't hear from her for like ever and a day, and then all of a sudden, she divulges to him that he has a son. The kid's like 2 years old. So they start custody proceedings, and, you know, child support proceedings begin, and David Thorne's like all about it. He's like, yeah, sure, of course, you know, it's my kid. And so all this is going on, and he was totally fine about it. He was like, great, you know, I've got a son. And he started spending time with his child at Yvonne's house, and he actually had just had his first overnight visit with the child at the time of the murder. Now, getting on back to that. So, April 1st, 1999 dawns. Yvonne's mother, Tanya, goes to her home to drive one of Yvonne's children to school, and she walks in the door and she finds Yvonne face down on the floor in a pool of blood. Obvious drag marks in the blood, and here's the really creepy part, guys. Here's the really creepy part. 4 of Yvonne's 5 children were locked into a bedroom. The 5th child was 5 years old at the time and was wandering around the house, but get this, this is the really oodie-doo-doo-doo-oodie-doo-doo part. This child was clean and dressed. No blood on this child anywhere. How the fuck did that kid not get any blood on him unless the killer stayed at the house taking care of the child until Tanya arrived? Maybe, possibly. The problem is that while this child was 5 years old, he was, I think, borderline autistic, something along those lines, and so he couldn't really divulge much. He couldn't describe what happened. Okay, so just so you know, and I'm going to read this to you from the memorandum of Brent Turvey, who is a fantastic criminal profiler. This guy is like a rock star. I'll include a link to this down below in the description so you can take a look. I will also include a link to the David Thorne case website so that you guys can go and start taking a look around. And I actually have access to the entire case file, so as I get pieces of that case file and I analyze them and do videos, I'm going to upload those to a separate website so that you guys have access to everything that I have access to. Okay, cool, we're good? All right, moving on. So, starting at the top here, it should be noted that not all of the evidence in this case was made available to these examiners, owing in part to the lack of discovery sought and acquired by the original counsel in this case. Furthermore, the nature of the available evidence strongly suggests that the unexamined portions would reveal a great deal more evidence in support of the defendant's request for a new trial if examined by independent objective experts. Essentially, what this means is that the defense screwed the pooch, and the prosecution was even more so, because God forbid they actually attempt to solve a murder. Now, here's what you have to understand about David Thorne. David Thorne was tried and convicted of this murder. However, he wasn't alone in the conviction of this murder. Joseph Wilkes was also convicted. Now, Joseph Wilkes confessed to the crime. Here's what you need to know about Joseph Wilkes. He was young at the time. He had no attorney, no representation. He was a high school dropout. He was a known drug addict. And he has a low IQ. Sound a little familiar to to anybody? No, David Thorne was convicted not of the murder itself, but of conspiracy. And basically, it was said at trial that he hired Joseph Wilkes to kill Yvonne for $300. I'm going, that's a bargain basement fucking hitman. I mean, you get what you pay for. Come on. What the fuck is... Anyway, so yeah, David Thorne was convicted of conspiracy, and it was said that he wanted Yvonne dead because he didn't want to pay child support and he wanted custody of his son. Yeah, that's a great way to go about it. Hire a fucking known drug addict for $300 to kill your ex-girlfriend, and everything will just be hunky fucking dory. Huh? I mean, you know, at least in the Stephen Avery case, they made a half-ass attempt to make it seem legit. Alright, moving on. On September 15th, 1999, a Stark County grand jury indicted David Thorne with 1 count of aggravated murder. The grand jury also added the specification David Thorne conspired to commit murder for hire. At his September 16th, 1999 arraignment, David Thorne pled not guilty to the charges. David Thorne was charged with hiring Joseph Wilkes to kill his ex-girlfriend Yvonne Lane. Miss Lane was the mother of 5 children. David Thorne was the father of one of Miss Lane's children. I'm omitting the child's name because I don't think that he needs to have his name put out there. That's just rude. So I will not... all these kids are over the age of 18 now, but I'm not going to invade their privacy like that. That's just rude. Mr. Wilkes confessed he killed Miss Lane in her home on March 31st, 1999. Mr. Wilkes agreed to testify truthfully about the crime and David Thorne's involvement in the planning of the murder in exchange for a life sentence with possibility of parole after 30 years. For fuck's sake. A jury trial commenced on January 18th, 2000, at which time the following evidence was adduced. On April 1st, 1999, Tanya Lane, the victim's mother, went to Yvonne Lane's home to take one of her grandchildren to school. When she arrived, Tanya found her daughter's body. Yvonne's throat had been cut and her body was lying in a pool of blood. Not only was it lying in a pool of blood, kids, okay, here's the thing. There was obvious drag marks. It was like a swimming pool of blood. Okay, you say pool of blood in your mind, you kind of like imagine a little tiny... No. This sliced to her throat. And I have the pictures, and I will be showing these to you guys. So, you know, Miss Lane's children, if any of you are watching these, I suggest you don't watch those specific videos. I don't want you to see your mom like that. But people need to see the truth. I'm just saying. So, at any rate, this specific mark went from left to right. It was 8 inches in length, 4 inches in width. And there were no hesitation marks on this thing, dude. It was a straight, clean cut. Not only was it a straight, clean cut, it severed her vocal cords and it nicked one of her vertebrae. She was damn near decapitated. Long day. And as we get further into this case, you're going to see how the fuck there is no way that Joseph Wilkes committed this murder. There's just no way. The story that he told does not pan out. He claims that they were sitting on the couch at the time that he cut her throat and that she stood up, walked to the sliding glass door, turned around, and told him why. There is no way. There is no way that happened. First of all, she wouldn't have been able to say shit. Her vocal cords were completely severed. Second of all, there's no way she would have been able to walk. Arterial spray goes very quickly. It will make you lightheaded and unable, very weak very quickly in a matter of seconds. It's insane what arterial spray can do to the human body. Moving on. While there were 2 partial bloody footprints at the scene, there was little other physical evidence. The police were unable to recover any usable fingerprints. Although a knife was recovered from a nearby storm sewer, the knife had been wiped clean. As part of the investigation, the police discovered Yvonne had recently implemented paternity proceedings for her son, Brandon. What they don't tell you is that while the paternity proceedings had been implemented, David Thorne was completely okay with this. He was totally fine. He was absolutely okay with paying child support, being named the father, having all the fatherly responsibilities. He wanted to be a dad. As a result, David Thorne was ordered to pay child support in the amount of $358 per month with weekly payroll deductions beginning in March 1999. By the time of his first payment, David Thorne owed more than $700 in back child support. Now, the Alliance police tried to use that as motive. Here's the thing. David Thorne had a regular job. He was a hard worker. He was really, he had his life close to together. Anybody who knows anything knows that at the end of the year, when you get your fucking tax return, he could have paid that $700 off, no fucking problem, and he would have. David Thorne had no problems with any of this. This is where Alliance PD really pisses me right the fuck off. The Alliance police learned of Mr. Wilkes through Rose Moore. Ms. Moore contacted the police to tell them she and her boyfriend, Chris Campbell, had spoken with Mr. Wilkes at the Carnation Mall in Alliance on the night of March 31st, 1999. Okay. So the plot thickens. There wasn't even any fucking indication of either one of these gentlemen being involved in this murder until this bitch fucking called. According to Miss Moore, Mr. Wilkes told her and Mr. Campbell he was in Alliance because he had been hired to kill a woman. Mr. Wilkes made statements he had purchased a knife at Walmart and showed Ms. Moore and Mr. Campbell the knife. Ms. Moore remembered Mr. Wilkes saying he was hired for money to commit the murder for a guy. That's the best you got there, Rosie? Seriously? And not only that, but I don't give a fuck how stupid you are. You don't tell people you're about to commit a murder and then go commit the murder. Huh? In contrast, Mr. Campbell recalled Mr. Wilkes stating his girlfriend had paid for a room for him at the adjoining Comfort Inn. This girlfriend had dropped him off and the girlfriend had asked Mr. Wilkes to commit the murder. No. This is taken from the court record, which had these statements transposed. According to our documentation, Miss Moore states that it was a girlfriend, and Campbell states that it was a guy. In July 1999, Mr. Wilkes confessed to the murder and implicated David Thorne, claiming David Thorne paid Mr. Wilkes to kill Miss Lane. Mr. Wilkes gave details how David Thorne planned the murder, provided an alibi for himself, provided Mr. Wilkes with a place to stay before and after the murder, provided transportation to and from that location, and provided money to purchase the batting gloves and the knife used in the murder. Mr. Wilkes testified David Thorne wanted custody of his son and did not want to pay child support to Miss Lane. Mr. Wilkes testified he rented a room at the Comfort Inn at Carnation Mall in Alliance on March 31st, 1999. He then purchased batting gloves and later a knife at the Kmart in the mall. Okay, so Ms. Moore says it was a Walmart. Mr. Wilkes says it was a Kmart. All we're missing is a fucking Target. The next morning, he claimed David Thorne picked him up at the hotel and took him to a friend's house. Mr. Wilkes hid his black nylon pants in the woods near his friend's house. He could not recall what he did with his shoes or his shirt. Really? You can remember what you did with the pants, but you can't remember what you did with the fucking shoes or the shirt? That's ridiculous. It's completely stupid. After 5 days of testimony and deliberation, the jury found David Thorne guilty of aggravated murder and guilty of the specification David Thorne conspired to commit murder for hire. Conclusions. Number 1, there is no physical evidence that directly or indirectly implicates Mr. Thorne in this crime. The record does not dispute this fact. The only evidence connecting David Thorne with the commission of the crime, the murder of Yvonne Lane, is the testimony of Joe Wilkes, Rose Moore, and Chris Campbell. The statements and testimony of Joe Wilkes is inherently unreliable. He is a known drug addict and convicted criminal who has given multiple versions of the events. This includes the entire spectrum of possibilities, from his direct involvement at David Thorne's instruction to his involvement at his girlfriend's instruction and finally to not having been involved in the perpetrating of the homicide at all. Kids, what did we learn from Brendan Dassey? That when they tell multiple stories, they're full of shit. Rose Moore states that Joe Wilkes told her that he intended to kill a woman later identified as Yvonne Lane at the direction or request of his unidentified girlfriend. Rose Moore states that she was told this in front of Chris Campbell. Her version of Mr. Wilkes' statement contradicts that of Mr. Campbell. So if she was told this in front of her boyfriend, but her boyfriend has a totally different version of events, is it just me or is that just bullshit? It sounds like somebody wanting reward money. That's what it sounds like to me. Chris Campbell, a convicted cocaine dealer, stated that Joe Wilkes told him he intended to kill a woman later identified as Yvonne Lane at the direction of an unidentified male. This statement was made in front of Rose Moore. His version of Mr. Wilkes' statement contradicts that of Miss Moore. Yeah, sorry, I don't trust drug dealers. End of story. Just period. Conclusion 2. The defense in this case failed to have the evidence related to the criminal investigation examined by an independent crime investigation / police policy and procedures expert. Subsequently, potentially exculpatory evidence and circumstances have gone unviewed and unexamined by the defense. Furthermore, it has become clear to these examiners that the police gave uncritical acceptance to the inculpatory statements of Joe Wilkes. It is also clear that other logical suspects and leads were not followed. The following list is of primary examples and is certainly not meant to be exhaustive. A. In many of the police interviews, only the last interview is taped. They didn't tape all the interviews of all the people that they talked to. They just taped the last one. Yeah, that's not suspicious as shit. Number 2, the chief of police responded to the scene while out on a date and brought his date with him into the crime scene. This fucking bitch is standing over a murdered woman on a date? I'm sorry, that does not guarantee tail at the end of the date, homie. That was in bad taste. For just the dating etiquette, not even about being a cop. Oh my God. The fuck? As evidenced by item 2B, there was little control over who entered and exited the crime scene. A security log was kept, but far too many people were traveling in and out of the scene. Oh, and that's the thing, guys. Now, I'm not going to read this whole thing to you because that's annoying. But the cops didn't wear shoe covers or gloves in the house. At one point, they take a picture of Yvonne. She's been rolled onto her back, and they have her by her hair, and they're holding up her head to take a picture of her. I mean, this is bad. This is really bad. Really, really bad. So, I'm going to include the link to this statement down below in the description. I'm also going to include a link to the website about the David Thorne case so that you can start taking a look at the evidence on there. Don't forget to subscribe to me here on YouTube. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, MamaPhoenix6. And if you boogie on over to the About page, you'll find everything from my Facebook fan page to my blog to my Pinterest boards. Thank you all very much for watching. We'll see you soon.